Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the Kalibrgun Cricket 2 Tactical. In this video we're going to be conducting a full disassembly of the rifle. To begin with, we're going to be removing all the wooden parts of the rifle. So to remove the grip and the back piece, all we need to do is flip the rifle up and remove these two screws here. That's done using a 5mm Allen key. To remove this back section, all we need to do is pull it back slightly, lift the back up, then pull it all the way. If you try and just pull it straight up, you'll come across these two pins here which will stop you doing that. Next up, we'll take the cheek piece off, and that's done by removing the two screws, one in either side, using a T10 Torx bit. Once the screws are removed, we can just pull the cheek piece off the top. From the factory, it is fitted with a small piece of double-sided tape on the front there, so it may get caught up the first time we remove it, but my one's already been off once, so it's already broken. Next up, we can degas the rifle. So to do that, we need to remove this split pin here. And to do that, we're going to be taking a nice wide flat-bladed screwdriver, putting in the linkage, splitting it apart and removing the linkage from the little piece of the trigger here. With that done, we can take a 2mm Allen key and loosen this screw in the back of the cylinder. Now once you do that a couple turns, the air from the cylinder will start to bleed out this hole here, although my one's already been degassed, so we can go ahead and retighten that little screw there. This bleed screw is behind the regulator, so loosening this should bleed all the air out the rifle, although before we take the cylinder apart we will be conducting a manual check. Next up, we'll flip the rifle on its side and remove this cover piece here by removing the 4 screws securing it on. Again, that's done with a T10 Torx bit. With those 4 screws removed, if we pop the cocking arm open, we can now hook the cover piece off like so. Next up, we'll remove the cocking arm to make the rifle a little easier to handle. Firstly, we're going to loosen and remove this screw in the front here using a T20 Torx bit. Next, we're going to loosen and remove these 2 screws here using a 2.5mm Allen key. And then we can take the cocking arm off. We could remove the cocking lever if we wanted to, but we're going to leave it on. Up next, we're going to be taking a measurement of the cocking linkage length. So if we take a standard tape measure and measure from this little piece here. So in the back here we have this notch with the 2 grub screws on. We're going to be taking from a measurement from this edge here all the way till the back edge of the cocking dog here. And on my rifle that seems to be about 26.3 centimeters. Up next, we can remove the cylinder and the barrel from the rifle by loosening these 3 clamp screws in the side of the block. That's done by using a 3mm Allen key. We can then flip the rifle on its end and loosen and remove these 2 grub screws here using a 3mm Allen key. With that done, we should be able to slide the cylinder out from the front of the rifle. Like so. As you slide that out, just make sure that you've tightened the bleed screw so it doesn't scratch on the trigger housing. With that done, we can take out the 2 grub screws that secure the cocking rod to the pellet probe. That's done using a 1.5mm Allen key. With that done, the barrel can be slid out of the back block. And then the back rod can be removed from the cocking rod. With that done, we can take the barrel all the way out of the back here. Up next, we can remove the cocking rod from this piece here. And then we can do that simply by unscrewing it. With it unscrewed, we can pull the small spring in the front there and the cocking linkage out from the centre of the rifle. Next up, we'll remove the trigger, and that's simply done by removing these 4 screws here, 2 on either side, using a 2mm Allen key. With that done, the trigger housing can be pulled out. There we have it. Next we'll remove the cover plate on this side by removing the 4 screws that secure it on. Again, that's done by using a T10 Torx bit. Next up we'll remove the scope rail, and that's simply done using a 3mm Allen key, removing these 2 screws here. There we have the scope rail removed, and then we're left with the 2 blocks here. With that done, we'll bring back the cylinder and start disassembling that. Next up we'll disassemble the air tube and air cylinder assembly. Before we start though, we are going to make sure that there's no residual air left inside the air tube. To do that, we're going to depress the valve on the end here. I'm going to be doing it using the end of one of my Allen keys. So if we can depress it with fairly easily and no air comes out, we know that the air cylinder is fully degassed. And once we're happy, we can start unscrewing things. So first of all, I'm going to unscrew the front section here. Next up, we'll remove the valve end. Now my rifle is a sub 12 rifle, so as we remove the valve end from this, we will be able to tip out a spacer set and a plenum plug. So this is the plenum plug that's fitted from factory to limit the power. So on FAC rifles you won't have this, but on my rifle we do, as it's a sub 12 one. The other thing you'll notice is that we have another plug in the valve housing, so just be aware of that as well. Now if you want to retain your valve setting, you can take a set of calipers, measure from the top of the housing to the top of the adjuster screw there, and on my rifle it's about 8.8mm. But to remove the valve, we just simply need to use a set of snap ring pliers, get in there, in the holes, and just remove the adjuster screw entirely. There we have the valve spring, and then the plug at the end there. To remove the regulator from the cylinder, we just simply need to locate the regulator, take an M4 bolt, then I'm going to be using a 3mm Allen key to screw this into the bottom of the regulator piston. So there we have it, there's the bolt in the bottom of the reg piston. Then to get the reg out, we'll come through with a set of long nose pliers and pull the reg from the tube. And there we have it, there's the regulator separated from the cylinder tube. We'll start disassembly of the reg very shortly. The first thing we'll do though is finish off disassembling the bottle. First thing we'll do is remove the Picatinny rail on the bottom. I'm going to do that using a 3mm Allen key. Next up, the bottle can just be unscrewed. It does have an O-ring behind it, so just be careful that that doesn't get lost as you take the bottle off. This thread here is an M18 by 1.5, so if you wanted to, you could replace this bottle for something a little larger, as this is a standard thread size. The last thing left on the assembly here is the gauge. Now the gauge for me was incredibly difficult to remove. It's both done up nice and tight from the factory and held in by Loctite, so unless you really need to get it off, I would recommend just leaving it alone. To actually remove the gauge from the assembly, what I had to do was pop off the glass of the gauge, make this little spacer ring here, so this piece here, which is a nice tight fit in the brass section of the gauge. With the spacer ring in place, what I could do then is use a good quality adjustable spanner, grip the brass outer housing nice and tight and undo it. I did try and use a small box spanner to remove the gauge, but unfortunately the ones I had were either too big or too small for the gauge, so I had to do it my own way. But with the gauge loose, we can come through with an adjustable spanner and just unscrew the gauge from the housing. There we have it. There's the gauge. It is a standard 8th BSP gauge. It does have an O-ring in the bottom, and as I said before, it was held on by Loctite from the factory. With that done though, we can get started on the regulator. So this is the regulator of the rifle here, and I did make a reg tester for it. This reg was set at 120 bar from the factory, although we have been experimenting with it a little lower at around 85. But before we start disassembling it, we need to take a measurement of the distance from the top of the adjuster screw, this is the adjuster screw, to the top of the reg housing. What this will allow us to do is reset the reg to this position so that we retain our regulator set pressure. On our regulator, the distance between the adjuster screw and the top here seems to be about 7.6mm, and that gets us 85 bar. But next we're going to come through with an Allen key or something similar that's a nice good fit in the adjuster screw and get that loosened. It is a standard piston style regulator, so loosening the regulator increases reg pressure and tightening this adjuster screw decreases reg pressure. Now we have the adjuster screw removed. It is plastic and it does have the sealing face on the bottom there. Next up we'll remove the reg piston, and to do that we're going to remove the snap ring in the base there. Come through with some snap ring pliers and get that removed. With that done, we'll take our M4 bolt that we used earlier, screw it into the base of the reg piston, and then remove the reg piston. We'll have Belleville washers over it, so just be careful they don't get lost as you remove the reg piston. Take a close look at it there. You can see the Belleville stacks, stacked in pairs, and it's a fairly heavy Belleville stack. And there we have the piston, one O-ring around the base there. So there we have that. We'll bring back the reg body and remove the little brass securing screw which houses an O-ring in the middle there. To remove that, what we're going to be doing is coming through with a nice thin flat bladed screwdriver, getting it in one side and then loosening the screw. With the screw removed, we can just knock the O-ring out from the body. There we have it. There's the regulator fully disassembled. So we'll stick all this to one side and bring back the back block of the rifle. So here we have the back block. The first thing we'll do is remove the hammer spring adjuster and the hammer spring. To do that, we'll take a 3mm Allen key and loosen this grub screw in the base. That screw there is the lock for the hammer spring adjustment. With it removed, we can just unscrew the hammer spring adjuster from the back. There we have it. There's the hammer spring adjuster and the hammer spring. Right then, and here we have the back block ready to be disassembled. We're not going to be doing a full disassembly of this as it does require some pins to be knocked out, but we're going to be taking apart everything that can be taken apart without knocking the pins out. I don't like knocking the pins out of these blocks as once you take them out they're normally pretty loose in the holes. We could pin them back over and make them tight again, but I just prefer not to do so if we don't need to take them out. But with that said, the first thing we'll do is remove these 4 screws here, and we're going to be doing that with a T6 Torx bit. With the screws off, we can take the cover piece off, and that exposes the inner workings of this back section here. So as we pull the cocking arm back, we see that this part here rotates the magazine or indexes the magazine. Then as we push it forward again, it retracts into the block. At the same time, the hammer is pushed back, so it's latched on the trigger sear. Then if we had hammer spring pressure on the front though, it would keep it latched, and then when we pulled the trigger, it'd be allowed to fly forward. With that said though, the first thing we're going to do is remove the pellet probe. It's done by removing this screw in the top using a 2mm Allen key. With that removed, this linkage here can be removed. Then what we'll do is using a set of small tweezers, remove this pin in the back here. That one there. And then with that done, the pellet probe can be just slid out the front and removed like so. So there we have the pellet probe. With that out, next thing we'll do is remove the hammer. We're going to do that by removing this pin in the side, and I'm going to do that using some parallel pliers. So gripping the pin and then unscrewing it. Once the pin's out the back, we can just gently pull the hammer and it should come straight out the back. This red section here is the spring guide and the thing that we see when we cock the rifle back as our cocking indicator. That's what tells us if the rifle is cocked or not. Next thing we'll do is remove this little indexing arm here. So first thing we'll do is take a small set of tweezers, pry up this spring here and just get that unhooked. Next we'll pull it back slightly and then just lift this piece up. It does have a spacer on the back, so this piece here, so just be careful that that doesn't get lost if you end up needing to take this apart for any reason. Up next we're going to be removing this little module in the end here. To do that we're going to be loosening this screw using a T6 Torx bit and then using a 2.5mm Allen key to remove this screw here. Next, we'll take a set of tweezers, remove this pin here, put that safely to one side, then remove the whole unit from the inside of the block here. We have it, there's this part here. It does have a small spring on it, so make sure that doesn't get lost. We have this back section here, which has this pin that runs through the center of it. Then we have the module itself, so this piece here. With that all done, that's pretty much everything that we can remove from the indexing system. I'm going to just remove the last few things now. The first thing is this little ball detent for the pellet probe. To do that, we're going to use a T6 Torx bit. Just remove this screw here. Then we can use a set of tweezers to remove this piece of sprung steel from the back. And then we're left with a small ball bearing in the bottom there, which we can just knock out nice and gently. Lastly, we'll remove the magazine indexing pin, this pin here. To do that, we'll come in from the bottom, just remove this screw here, or the grub screw, using a 2.5mm Allen key. And we can gently knock out the small pin and the spring behind it. So those two pieces there. With that done, that's pretty much the entire rifle fully disassembled. We're not going to be going any further than this, as going any further to remove the arm here, this little piece here, and a few other pieces of the trigger would require knocking the pins out. And as I said earlier, that's something that I'm not really interested in doing. Right then, that's going to about do it for this one, guys. I'm going to have a look over the rifle, see what little improvements we can make, and I'll keep you posted on what we end up doing with the rifle. But for now, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.